What's going on, everyone? I hate to make another video so soon after the last video I just did, but this is something that hasn't really been talked about really well. And I'm not going to say that I'm going to do better than other people, but it's something that I've actually been reading about. There's a book called Trust Us, We're Experts, where it talks about this problem where basically businesses and governments and whatnot mostly businesses are hiring third-party sort of PR type people to spread disinformation and bullshit about their product to make them look good, which we already know they do. But what you may not know is that they don't do it in the usual ways in which you would think they would do it. Because if they were to be very overt with it, they would do it by saying, "Oh, this corporation, there's nothing wrong here. They're not doing harm. That would not work." So what they do instead is they use third parties. They use so-called, they use scientists and non-profits. What they don't tell you is that these non-profits are funded by these corporations who are trying to manipulate people into believing their bullshit, basically. This has been happening for the longest time. And so we're at a stage now where virtually nothing that you see, you hear, or whatever it is that you find information from can't be trusted, because they're manipulating you. They're trying to get you to join their side, their crusade. And this is not good. This is exactly the problem that we have here. This is exactly wrong. This should not be what we are doing. But it is what we're doing. We're getting information from bad sources. And then when actual information comes out to disprove their bullshit, it shows their bullshit for what it is, they call it flawed science. They're manipulating science. This is a message especially for those so-called rationalists who think that science is just science. Oh, it's just science. That's doesn't need explaining. Doesn't need. That doesn't need any explanation or anything like that. If it's scientific, it's true. But it's not true. Not always. Or if it is true that what they're saying is true, it's only half true. They're manipulating you with bullshit. This was made, I think it was probably made in the early 2000s, but things can change, but things haven't changed for the better on this one. 80,000 people. There's all these different studies that came out about lead poisoning in the 70s and industry, and even in the 20s, not necessarily studies came out, but news came out where people were dying. They were suffering serious health effects from lead poisoning, but the lead industry denied it. They covered it up. They lied about it, not directly, but by using other people, by using third parties to negate what had been seen, pulling the wool right over people's eyes. This is especially something that's problematic, especially when you have these rationalists who are just like, oh, well, it's just a fact. Facts don't need to be dealt with or proven or disproven or anything. We already know they're facts. How do you know they're facts? How do you know that they're not manipulating it? How do you know it's not bullshit? You don't know. You're telling me a bunch of bullshit, and you're saying that it's a fact, and you're saying that it's scientific, and then the other side is flawed science. But you don't know that. Most of these people haven't tested this stuff out for themselves. And those who have tested it out for themselves already know, so they're not really talking about it. So, back to what I was talking about. In the 20s, this was discovered, although actually it was known way before that for thousands of years that lead, was not good. It caused poisoning and whatnot. But it was ignored, or not really seen, or not cared about, or there was manipulations going on. So in the 20s, it was really noticed, but it was ignored. It was called flawed science. It was called bullshit by third parties who were being paid off by these companies to give you bullshit, to give you junk. For about 40, 50 years, this happened, and still kept happening after laws were finally passed against this bullshit, the lead industry, and it's bullshit. But before that happened, tons of lead was being used in gas, and it was causing developmental problems in children and other people. It was causing all these types of problems, and it was ignored because the industry kept manipulating people, kept telling people a bunch of bullshit. They kept lying about it. And then they kept calling the lies true. And there's this thing that says if you tell a lie long enough, it becomes true. So they gave you a bunch of bullshit. They said it's reality. This is not that, the other side is telling you a bunch of bullshit. So they kept the game going for 50 years. And even after these laws were passed, they still kept giving you bullshit. And when a big study came out in 79, they had to try and debunk it. They had to try all these things. And for 13 years they tried. They still try to manipulate the facts. They're doing it in other ways now. So, just because it comes from some expert, some non-profit organization, or whatever it is, doesn't mean that it's true, doesn't mean that it's trustworthy. That's the main reason why I'm making this episode, because the biggest lies don't come from the media necessarily, although sometimes they do. But they don't necessarily come from the media. They come more from lies given to the media by these companies. These different third-party companies literally send over news articles already written, and the news companies just publish them as is. And they don't question it. They don't look at it. And so they don't realize how full of bullshit these companies are. You know, back when this book was written, published, I believe it was 2000, sometime in 2000s, early 2000s, or somewhere around there. You know, that was talking about how miners are and other types of workers are more people die from work-related problems than they do from car accidents, than they do from AIDS and like several other things. 4 million people are out of work, are facing this problem of having a disability and being out of work and being underpaid for this disability. They're not being paid as much as they would have been if they were still working, because these asshole companies who are just lying and trying whatever they can to get away with whatever they can get away with. You know, this is one of the biggest problems of capitalism. This idea that the free market is the best decision, the best way of helping the people, unless the free market is hurting the people. But that's never mentioned, is it? That's the biggest problem that I have with libertarianism and this sort of republicanism and this sort of rampant capitalism and consumerism is this idea of the freer of the market, the freer of the people. And in some ways I kind of agree, but in most ways I kind of don't, because the freer the market, the easier it is for them to get away with lies and manipulations. And that's what's happening now in the United States, especially. Capitalism is not the big saver of lives and the economy that people think it is. I mean, they can point out to you that, like half of the population has improved poverty-wise, but they don't tell you about the bullshit and the lies that they're still doing, that these businesses are still getting away with every single day in these capitalist countries. And people want to point out China and say, well, China's not any better, that's a communist country. No, China is not a communist country. China is basically the same. It's worse than the United States when it comes to capitalism, actually, because it's not. And I'm not saying that it's a free market, as in there's no regulations or anything like that. I'm saying that the idea of capitalism has gone to an extreme over there, because the Chinese government doesn't care about its people. It doesn't care about its workers. The U.S. government doesn't really either, for the most part, but the Chinese government definitely doesn't. And so it gets all these companies over there and treats their workers like shit. And the Chinese government doesn't care. They're just getting money for it. They're getting more powerful. They're getting more money. And they're weaponizing it against other countries. And this is done under the name of free market and capitalism. And, it's a good idea to help these countries out, improve their economies. What they don't tell you is the major problems with these companies and what they're doing in these areas. And people want to point out that that Apple is in China, and this factory where these people are committing suicide in these factories because it's so horrible there. But I don't think Apple's alone in this one. This is not just Apple. It's every single company that you pretty much could name. It's all doing this. Treating their workers like shit, lying about it, saying, well, we're giving them something, aren't we? We're helping their economy, we're helping them out. Without us, they wouldn't survive. But what kind of survival is it when they don't have very good conditions? Now, I'm not saying that it has to be luxurious and perfect all the time. I'm just saying that there's way more that they're not telling you here, because if they were to tell you, if they were to show you, you would be horrified. You would be like, what the hell are you doing to these people? This is horrible. So China is not a communist country. China is basically the extremes of capitalism, government-controlled capitalism. Now, if you want a communist country or socialist country, you could look to Venezuela. Some people say that the problems there are caused by socialism. And I think that may be partly true, but I think most of it has to do with corruption and with ineffective leaders. And also, some people want to point out Scandinavian countries like Sweden as socialists, but they're not actually socialists. They have free markets. They don't even have a minimum wage, if I remember correctly. But they deal with that. They do have help for their workers and healthcare and all these things, but they don't have a minimum wage. And I think the way that works out has to do more with how they deal with the companies. Because minimum wages don't necessarily equate to good conditions and all these other things. So, that's the thing. Sweden is not a socialist country. It has some socialistic, I wouldn't say ideas. I would say it has some socialistic policies, a little bit like mixed in with it, but it's not socialist. It's not really even capitalistic. It's a mixed economy with a very left-leaning type of thing. Then again, you would think the same. You would think the opposite for the United States. The United States is a capitalist country, but actually it's not. It's a mixed economy, and it's actually almost as left in many ways as Sweden is, and it's becoming more so in some ways. And China is I'm not really sure what you could qualify China as being. But they are not socialists, they're not communists, they have very, very, very capitalistic tendencies with a tendency towards authoritarianism and dictatorial rules, and a sort of credit system where the government literally controls who can work based on their activities online and in the world and whatever. If you do anything that the government doesn't like, it basically can do whatever it wants to you. Money wise and prison wise. These governments, they work there. They do their business there. There's been stories of serious problems that are happening over there. People say that, China dealt with their coronavirus problem. Yeah, they may have, but they did it in really bad ways. They basically welded people in their homes. They did all these horrible things to keep them there. Unrelated to the coronavirus, they've imprisoned a bunch of I forget how you pronounce it, but Uyghur Muslims, and treated them horribly. Chinese government is not a very friendly government. If you hear otherwise, you're listening to liars who. Now, I'm not saying that they're like evil or malicious or anything like that. I'm just saying that there's way more to this than just one or another. And it's not seen, it's not listened to, it's not looked at. Because if it was looked at, you would realize what is happening here. You'd be asking questions, and they wouldn't be able to answer any of the questions. They'd be diverting you. They'd be asking you questions instead. This is what these companies do. They divert attention away from themselves and towards you. Oh, you're being irrational. You're not basing this off of science. This is a flawed science. This is all these different sort of ways in which they can control and manipulate you. So, I'm not going to try and make this too long, but I thought it would be a topic that, something to, because, this is something that you may not realize. And there's way more involved in what I'm talking about here, but I'm going to leave it here because if I keep going, I could go for like hours on this, because there's a lot more nuances and a lot more details to go over. I might do that in other videos, but anyways, this is Political Ideas and Thoughts. If you have any comments or questions about this, please leave them below. And I'll talk to you in the next one.